Hello and welcome to our new development center. I know we said we're going to do a tour of 50K. We are going to be doing that soon. I'm just wrapping up a lot of client projects right now, but let's dive into this week's questions. Jasmine Star on TikTok writes, how long would you say that shirt lasts if you wash it once or twice a week? And this is a reference to that episode on the Kith white shirt. I would say it really depends on what your acceptable level of wear and tear and presentation is. When you are designing clothing as a brand, you should at least design it for 30 washes, and that's typically a year's worth of wear because no one's gonna be wearing a shirt every single day. And that's where it kind of gets funny with fashion, where people have very different ranges of what they deem as acceptable. There's a lot of people that will have shirts with holes in them, stains on them, and say it's a perfectly wearable garment because it still does the utility of covering them up for the most part. And then there's people that if the hand feel changes, if the ribbing changes, if it's not as presentable as when they first bought it, it's no longer good. So it's kind of a hard question to answer for that. It's really just gonna be how long will it last that's acceptable for you. When it comes to that Kith shirt itself, we would have to really do some stringent wash testing on that. But I would say that probably wouldn't last for my acceptable range more than like 5 to 10 washes. I would say it would align to something that you would get from like H&M or Zara. J Pocket on YouTube writes, the pasta analogy is actually perfect. Considering the low cost of basic acceptable, obviously that's a pasta dish options available for less than 30. Why the F would you pay more than $20 for a basic, unflattering, hastily produced, generic looking white t-shirt? For Kith? More like Kith my ass. You know what? When it comes to that Kith shirt, I think I kind of agree with you. I have seen a few items from Kith. For the most part, a lot of them have a lot of thought and intention to put into them. And for this one, it seems like the alignment of the brand of the product wasn't really where it should have been for what is a very simple product. I think there's a lot of things that could have been done differently to elevate that product that really would have maybe only added a few dollars and would have produced a significantly better product for their customer at the end of the day. So whenever you are a brand designing products that are very simple, you really need to pay attention to those details because those details matter. Pumpkin on TikTok writes, why do so many t-shirts, even expensive ones, have such irritating tags at the back of the neck? I've damaged more than one good shirt, either ripping it off or even with a knife by not being careful. Should I use a seam ripper or something else instead? Two-part question. If you're ever taking stuff off from clothing, get a seam ripper. You can get them from the dollar store. It's gonna be a lot better of a way to cut off those threads than something that's so large and bulky, such as a pair of scissors. But when it comes to the label at the back of the neck, what you're talking about is a woven label, and often what's called a damask woven label. I actually personally hate them as well. I think a lot of brands use them just because they've seen other brands use them. And when you are in the fashion space, unless you've been in the manufacturing side and you've seen what's capable, oftentimes, even brands at a really high-end level, they'll just reference what everyone else is doing. It's a big, giant copying game. Everyone's just using damask wovens because they know that works. You know, there's other methods. You can heat transfer, you can use softer wovens, you can use gross grains, you can change the placement, but oftentimes people are just using those wovens because they just know that's what's available. They might not know anything else is an option. Zachariah on YouTube writes, how would you come up with a pattern for your garment if it is your first rodeo? Would you leave this to your manufacturer or get it done with a designer? So it really depends on the complexity of your garment and the skill set of your manufacturer. So whenever you're making clothes, you're gonna need a pattern. A pattern is basically, let's say this front t-shirt panel, this arm sleeve, these are all pattern pieces. And this is what you cut your fabric with to ultimately sew your final garment. If it is your first rodeo, what I would say is probably lean into your manufacturer more. They are gonna know what their processes are like. They're the ones who are gonna ultimately creating the final product. So by letting them do the patterns, letting them do the sampling, letting their pattern master understand what you are trying to create, you're gonna really smooth out that process. That being said, I've seen a lot of brands try to go to their manufacturers that make great t-shirts and then all of a sudden ask them to make sports bras or leggings. If they do not have experience in these items, if their pattern master has never touched these garments before, they're not going to be able to create it. So in that case, what I would say is definitely work with a designer or a different manufacturer who has the ability to execute on the ultimate vision you're trying to create. Alice on YouTube writes, if most of the lint that comes off of people's clothes is in their dryer, what happens if you don't use a dryer? Do clothes just shed less? Absolutely. If you like hand wash and you hang dry your clothing, it's gonna last significantly longer than if you put it through a washing machine. Washing machines are quite aggressive, and typically in North America, people are throwing in their heavy hoodies, their lightweight garments, their denim, all into one machine, and it's tumbling around there for an hour. It's getting pulled on, it's getting stretched, it's getting twisted. It's quite an aggressive process when you're laundering your clothes. So that heat as well in the drying cycle is what causes a lot of staple fibers, natural fibers, to actually shrink up. That's why some clothing that's really delicate will say hand wash and hang dry only, because that process is just so aggressive. So if you want your clothes to last longer, definitely don't throw it in the dryer. Marcelo on YouTube writes, when will you guys release a course? So many things to teach. When it comes to an online course, we probably won't launch one. I'm very much a believer of sharing knowledge. So we built this entire development center, obviously to develop things for our clients, but to teach. You'll be seeing some series once we kind of get through our busy season. How, as a brand and a consumer, how can you identify fabrics? How can you actually know what each part of a clothing is? How can you construct better garments? What fabric should you be looking out for? All that is gonna be series that we're gonna be putting on our YouTube in the near future. And when it comes to teaching things, we might offer an in-person course for like brand designers in the future, but I am very much a part of democratizing information, and I cannot wait to share what we've been working on behind the scenes here. ASMR, oh, this might be an interesting one. ASMR makeup raindrops on YouTube writes, what do you think of toxic chemicals / PFAS found in clothing? There's been a lot of interest in terms of PFAS recently, and a lot of DWR coatings or water repellent coatings are gonna have it. So I think there's like a video on that Gore-Tex jacket recently. If you are worried about chemicals, PFAS is just one of many. When it comes to the dye stuff, those are all chemicals. When it comes to finishing the garments, those are all chemicals. You know, you're looking at sometimes they're using silicones to soften the garments, your reactive polyurethanes, enzyme washes. There is a whole host of chemicals that if you're gonna be wearing clothing in general, it's kind of just hard to avoid. What I would say is do what you can at home to not add to the problem. When you're washing your clothing, don't add fabric softener. Those are additional chemicals that lubricate the yarn. When you're using your dryer, don't use dryer sheets. Those also lubricate the fabrics with additional chemicals. If you're trying to avoid all chemicals, unless you're wearing unbleached cotton that you know where it's been made, avoiding all chemicals is just going to be impossible. What I would say is there's the environmental impact as well. Make sure you're buying your clothing from brands that work with places that have wastewater treatment plants, because when you're making fabric, you use a lot of water, and you want to be in a region that cares about this. You know, in China right now, you cannot dye fabric unless you have a full wastewater treatment plant and recycling plant to recapture. It's such an important part of the sustainability, is just being able to understand that you will still have an impact on the world by buying clothing, but you can do the right steps to minimize that ultimately. Crazy Ass Flip on YouTube writes, when you give you cost out a piece, that is just cost of goods sold, or does that include other overhead? If so, can you break it down by labor, logistics, etc.? So when it comes to the pricing that I give in the videos, it's really just what would be called FOB or ex-works pricing. What FOB means, free on board, that means that the factory is responsible of getting the goods from their factory to the port of departure. So whether that be an airport or a seaport, they're responsible for that truck, they're responsible for the export documents. And when it comes to ex-works pricing, that means that you have to pick it up from the factory. I can dive much more deeper into Incoterms if you guys want, but to be able to estimate the other costs of doing business is gonna be so hard for every single individual brand. It's kind of like a futile exercise, because what do I know how much Balenciaga's overhead is? Do they have a expensive coffee machine? Do they have lunches? Do they pay their logistics team X amount? It's gonna be different for every single brand, and ultimately those estimations are just gonna be a toss up in the air. What I'm trying to provide is what it would cost me to produce something very similar with a similar quality in that specific region. Asian Pride Bud on YouTube writes, are you an engineer? No, not by trade. Actually, I went to school to be a gas fitter. So I did like HVAC, I did geothermal, I did radiant floor heating, snow melt systems before I started my first business over a decade plus ago. But as Mark Rober says, think like an engineer. So that's it for this week's questions. Please leave more of your questions down below. I love diving into these. And thank you so much for all the support we've been receiving. Till next time. If you guys want to see more behind the scenes secrets on the fashion industry and learn more about how to create products and brands, be sure to like, comment, subscribe, and check out these videos.